Hello there. Here's another commentary. If you liked this review, you can thank my friend Heidi for this one. You may remember her as the one who gave me the Cheerwine to review. She specially requested this one, and when somebody I know requests one of these, I tend to sort of push it to the front of the line. I guess I'm just, I take care of my friends that way, but so yeah, this is one I think she actually requested me to do this one right around the time I had just started working on Return of Jafar, and I didn't want to break the momentum on Return of Jafar, because once I start a project, I like to finish it before moving on to something else, at least when it comes to, like big, long reviews like this. So, I ended up waiting until after Return of Jafar to do this one. And really, I think people were expecting me to hate this one a lot more than I did. And, if I hadn't done Return of Jafar before this one, I think I might have hated this more. But watching the ones like Cinderella and Return of Jafar have given me kind of a sense of perspective, on these movies, to the point where I realize just how bad they can really get. And I don't want to say I'm more forgiving of them necessarily, because that's not really right, but I just like I said, I just have sort of a sense of perspective on these, because I'm definitely not forgiving towards these movies. That can never, I don't think that can ever be said. But really, the main thing that pissed me off about this movie was the setup, was this whole scene here, with the whole thing of the king believing Radcliffe, which is probably the weakest setup to the weakest justification for a Disney sequel there's ever been. I doubt if I'm ever going to encounter a more poor justification for a Disney sequel than the justification they come up with for this movie. I mean, even with Return of Jafar, where Iago and Jafar escape just by kind of digging their way out of the magical Cave of Wonders, that was pretty damn weak. But it was at least kind of acceptable. I mean, maybe it could just be, like, you could make the excuse that, okay, you need to be a special kind of someone to get in, but it's easier to get out. Like, you could make that justification, and you could make it fairly plausible. But with this one, just the setup is just so weak. And I really, obviously, I raged against it for quite a while at the beginning of this review. And, so yeah, I think the rest of the movie didn't seem as bad to me just because of how bad the setup is. But really the other thing that I really hated about this movie, and something that I didn't really think I got across all that well, is how irritating the king is in this movie. By the end of this movie, you really do want to punch the king in the face. And I make comments about how easily manipulated he is, but I don't really think I got it across as well as I could have in this review. This king is the most gullible, easily led moron. It's really, really frustrating. Like, Radcliffe basically spends the whole movie talking in his ear like Grima Wormtongue. Or Grima, I think it's Grima. Sorry, like Grima Wormtongue. Just like basically telling you, hey, king, you should do this. And the king says, I should, shouldn't I? And it just gets so frustrating when it's so painfully obvious just to anyone who's watching that Radcliffe is manipulating these situations, and the king just completely falls for all. Ugh, God, I love that scene. If you guys haven't seen the extended cuts of Lord of the Rings, you really need to, because they're fantastic. But anyway, it's so painfully obvious how Radcliffe is manipulating everything that's going on, and the king just is never the wiser to any of it, and he's just not fit to be a monarch at all. But really, I often ask myself, how I would have made these movies. Like when I see a bad Disney sequel, I think it's a fun thought exercise to just sort of think about what I would do to make the movie better. And now, if it were up to me, I probably just wouldn't make them. But if I had to make the movie, what I would have done to make this one better is this. The movie establishes that there's tension in Jamestown between the natives and the settlers, and there's a good idea in there. There's a good idea in that, and this is what I would have done with that idea. Basically, what I would have happen is that the settlers, over the course of a few years, have been slowly expanding Jamestown, and have even started building smaller outlying towns. And because they have been slowly encroaching on the Native Americans' territory more and more, the Native Americans have lost the trust that they had for them at the end of the first movie, and have started more aggressively defending their territory. And in response to that, the king basically is having his hand forced and is getting ready to go to war. But instead of just going to war outright, he goes and he sends for an ambassador to see if a peaceful resolution can be made. And then when Pocahontas goes to England, the king, I would basically have the king say to her, look, we want that land, and we're going to get it one way or the other, so here's my suggestion. You and your people can be a part of our culture. We'll teach you our customs and our traditions, and we'll teach you how to behave like civilized people. That way we don't have to kill you in order to take your land. And basically what that would do then would mean that Pocahontas would need to teach the king the value of other cultures. Because in that time, that really was how people thought, was that they were doing native people from other cultures a favor by sort of imposing their cultures and beliefs on them. And that would mean that instead, that would have a lot of good effects. For instance, you wouldn't have to be forcing Radcliffe as the villain in this movie, which really makes no sense whatsoever. You wouldn't have to force him as the villain. The villain would instead be sort of an abstract, in that the villain would be the king's ignorance. And the king, he wouldn't be a bad guy. He'd just be a guy who didn't really know any better. He'd be a guy with a very narrow perspective, which I think would tie this movie in with the themes of the first movie a lot better. And it would also make the king into a more proactive and a more likable character. Not in that you agree with him or anything, but that you just you would almost kind of pity him for his ignorance and just having no real sense of perspective on the thing. And I think it would just overall make the movie a lot better. So that's how I would have done this if I were asked to write this movie. I would essentially make it an exercise in sort of cultural I don't want to say cultural teachings, but just educating the king on the benefits of collaborating with and making an effort to understand other cultures, and taking a multicultural view on the world, rather than just thinking of your culture as the only one that's proper and the only one that is worthwhile. And you could, I know that kind of comes off sounding like this would be an educational movie, but really it could all be done subtextually, I think. And I think that would have made this movie a lot better. So that's how I would have done it if I were asked to write this movie. Is I would have not tried to force Radcliffe as a villain, and I wouldn't even have tried to force a tangible villain. I would just have the villain be the abstract concept of cultural ignorance, really. And I think that's all you really need to do with it. I mean, I think that really that would tie it in to history a lot better. Obviously, you couldn't have things like Pocahontas dying of disease in England, or the Native Americans being wiped out. You'd have to change that part of history because this is a Disney movie after all. But really, I think it would be like sort of a nice nod. I shouldn't say that. It would be a good way, if nothing else, to tie it in with the themes of the first movie, where basically the first movie is about cultural ignorance. And I would make this movie in that same vein, just from a different perspective, really. And I think that would have made this movie a lot better. You know, this scene, and you'll see things like that in this scene, where the king is like, if she is as civilized as you claim, then I will stop my armada. And really, that speaks to that sort of is in reference to the general cultural ignorance, like the general point of view that their culture was the only civilized one, and it wasn't that they were necessarily trying to be overtly racist or hate these other cultures, it was just that they didn't really know any better. And I think that makes for a much more interesting villain dynamic, when the villain isn't really a bad guy, he just doesn't really know any better. And I think that makes it I think that would make it a lot more interesting. But anyway, yeah, this is one of those scenes where how easily manipulated the king is comes across a little better, I think, but I still don't think I really did it justice. My girlfriend kind of pointed that out to me when I was showing her this review, and if I had to go back and rewrite it, I would probably try to make that a little bit more clear. But yeah, that really, my two main problems with this movie are the setup and the king. Because all the problems that I have with this movie, excuse me, the problems that I have with this movie aren't really so much with Radcliffe, because Radcliffe's just being Radcliffe and just doing what he does. And it's not his fault that the king is enough of an idiot to buy his stories. But, yeah, I love this bit. Like, this song is just so catchy. This little Chip Skylark song, I love it. It's so catchy, it's so fun. And I enjoy the hell out of it. But anyway, yeah, I mean, and this scene, really, you know, like, Pocahontas accuses them of being the barbarians for torturing this animal. And there are a lot of inklings in this movie of the whole idea of the importance of cultural perspective and considering things from a multicultural point of view. But the movie doesn't really do anything with that concept, and I really think they should have. I think that would have made this movie a lot better. I'm sorry if you can hear the dogs barking downstairs, but yeah, like, you'll see in that moment right there that the king, like, Radcliffe is literally whispering in his ear and telling the king what to do, and it's so bad. This scene, I could have made another Lord of the Rings joke there. I had a commenter point that out to me, and I actually did think of it. Doing that whole thing in the inn. I can't think. I lose some Lord of the Rings nerd cred here because I can't remember the name of the inn that they go to, where the hobbits meet Aragorn. I can't think of the name, but I used to know it. I promise, but I can't remember it. But I could have made that joke there where, you know, like, that fellow's done nothing but stare at you since we arrived. Because it really, like, it almost is framed, it's framed almost exactly the same as that particular shot in the Lord of the Rings movie. And I could have made the joke there, but I figured I had already made one Lord of the Rings joke, and yes, I made two Fairly Odd Parents jokes. But basically, I just didn't bother with it because I would have had to find the footage from that scene. And I thought it kind of broke the flow of what I was talking about in that scene. So I didn't end up putting that joke in there. I could have, but I didn't. And there was a commenter that pointed it out to me. There's a commentator that called me out, and you guys are sharp. You guys are smart. So I just wanted to, yeah, I basically just, you know, just for time. This moment where John just hands the guy back his sword. That's stupid in and of itself. But then, of course, you know, it also allows him to draw this gun. And it's just, oh god, it's so idiotic, and it just really, it just hurts. There's just so much idiotic behavior in this movie that I just don't get. Those two, John Rolfe and John Smith, they end up having this like weird little bromance in this movie, and it's actually pretty entertaining. This joke I'm about to make, the droopy dog joke, I kind of feel like I was going out on a low note with the mouth jokes. But I think the shiny teeth in me thing really was the best mouth joke that I made. But, you know, like I said, I wanted to make a joke for every scene. And there actually is one scene that I left out of this review. And it's not even really a scene, it's just like a brief little cutaway. And you don't even see Radcliffe's face in the scene. But he pays off like those jester guys to set up the bear baiting. And like it just says, he basically like there's just this creepy guy that kind of shuffles up to him, and you see Radcliffe like from the back, and he says, "I want you to make sure that nothing goes according to plan." And he hands him a bag of money. And basically just pays him stuff out of it. And like that's the scene. And it's really kind of a superfluous scene, so I didn't include it in this review. I could have come up with another mouth joke for it, but really you don't even, you know, since you don't see his mouth in that scene, I think it would have been kind of forced in that instance. So I still, you know, like the whole mouth joke for every scene thing, I'm still counting it. But yeah, this whole movie, I just don't really get what its target audience was, and that's one of the main things you gotta know about any movie that you're making, is you gotta know who you're making the movie for, because if you don't, there's no point in making the movie at all. It's just that every movie has a demographic. You gotta have a demographic that you're shooting for, and I don't know who this movie was trying to appeal to. I don't really get it. And yes, I harped on the Twilight thing here again. I sometimes feel like I harp on the Twihards a little too much, but I understand that they're easy targets, and I probably shouldn't make fun of them as much as I should, but really it was just the best example that I could come up with, where it's not very good, and it's dumb, but it knows who its audience is, and it knows how to appeal to them, and it's at least smart in that regard, and this movie just was not. So yeah, if you're disappointed that I didn't hate this movie as much as others, you gotta remember I just got a different sense of perspective ever since Return of Jafar and Cinderella 2. But that's about all I have to say. So until next time, Code Monkeys, hope you enjoyed the commentary, and I'll see you later.